You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted Weekly Art History for All Ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today I wanted to do an episode about Frank Stella. Actually, Frank Stella is a topic a listener requested I cover, so I guess, Christos, this one is for you. Frank Stella was born in 1936 in Malden, Massachusetts. His first brush with art wasn't on a canvas, but on the hulls of boats and the walls of houses. His father was a doctor who, despite working 60 hours a week, would insist on doing painting projects around the house with Frank helping. This training would serve him well when Frank was a young adult. When he first moved to New York, he rented a loft in West Broadway and worked as a house painter to make ends meet. Stella's mother was an artistic painter, and he said growing up he was just surrounded by paint. There's a comfort in the familiar, which is probably why in numerous interviews throughout his life, Frank Stella said he always liked the physicality of paint. Now, growing up, his parents sent him to the prestigious Phillips Academy. It was a prep school, and there his art teacher was Patrick Morgan. Morgan taught art, but he was also a practicing studio artist, and he recognized Stella's talent and passion for art. Morgan introduced him to the world of abstraction. It was a world that was far removed from the representational styles that were standard in the art curriculum in the early 20th century. This opened Stella's eyes to the possibility of what art could be, and it serves as conclusive evidence that it's nice to every once in a while listen to your teacher. They just might have something worthwhile to share. Stella attended Princeton, where he was actually not enrolled in arts. He studied history, but he couldn't stay away from his love for art. He continued painting, and his style was initially influenced by the works of abstract expressionists. People like Pollock, de Kooning, and Frankenthaler were dominating the art scene in the mid-20th century. For many, abstract expressionism had pushed abstraction to its logical conclusion, becoming so far removed from representational imagery that it was about the fundamental elements of line, color, texture. It was about the mark-making of the artist rather than the appearance of the subject. And you can check the links in the show notes if you want to learn more. While Stella briefly flirted with the movement, something else caught his eye as he immersed himself in the New York art scene. Frank Stella has said that he really wanted to do something as good as what he saw from artists like Pollock. The thing is, these works were good largely because they pushed boundaries, and to be equally great, Stella couldn't simply follow in the footsteps of those other artists. He would need to go in a new direction. And that's how he came to embrace minimalism and post-painterly abstraction. Minimalism is a movement that's very clean, simple, and direct. As the name implies, a minimalist work reduces the art to what's needed and nothing more. A post-painterly abstraction, I guess, could benefit from a bit of a breakdown and clarification. When a painting has visible brushstrokes emphasizing the act of creation, it is described as painterly because as we view those marks, we're constantly reminded of the painter and their work. The Starry Night isn't so much a night landscape, it's Vincent van Gogh's interpretation of a night landscape. In a painterly work, we're reminded that we're not viewing the thing itself, but rather the subject filtered through a particular artist's lens. The prefix post would indicate after, so post-painterly means it's a phase that comes after the movement toward painterly abstraction. Well, what comes after a movement? Typically a backlash. Every generation carves out its own identity by rejecting the previous generation's style to some extent. Post-painterly abstraction is abstract, meaning it comes from the artist's imagination rather than representing the real world, but it seeks to not be painterly. We see flat fields of uniform color with little to no visible brushstrokes. While Pollock could stumble around his barn dripping paint on a canvas, post-painterly artists carefully and meticulously rendered their works. They might tape and apply several layers of thin washes to achieve a flat, uniform look and clean lines. Anyways, Frank Stella moved to New York in the late 1950s, ready to stir things up. Here, amidst the loft and galleries, the black paintings were born. These stark, minimal canvases, devoid of color and dominated by thick black stripes of varying widths, sent shockwaves through the art world. The paintings, seemingly simple, were a rebellion against the emotional outpourings of abstract expressionism. They focused on the very essence of painting, the flatness of the canvas, the act of applying paint, the interplay of form and line. In 1959, at just 23 years old, Frank Stella was the youngest artist included in the Museum of Modern Art's exhibition 16 Americans. The thing is, Stella was never one to remain stagnant. The black paintings established him as a leading figure in minimalism, but he was always looking for new frontiers to explore. He began incorporating metallic paints, creating a shimmering industrial aesthetic. The aluminum series, with its sharp geometric shapes and metallic sheen, pushed the boundaries of minimalism, blurring the line between painting and sculpture. Some critics accused his work of being cold and emotionless, devoid of a human touch. But Stella remained unfazed. He famously said, quote, "What you see is what you see," end quote. It's a great statement, not only summarizing the directness of the artwork, but highlighting the notion that in their simplicity and directness, post-painterly works become less about the lens of the artist and more about the viewer. He believed that art should speak for itself, and the emotional response it evoked was a matter of individual interpretation. In the 1960s, as most artists sought to reshape the art laid out across the canvas, Stella reshaped the canvas itself. He experimented with canvases that defied traditional rectangular formats, morphing into irregular shapes, ovals, stars, even sort of eccentric, irregular polygons. His color palette, while initially restricted, began to explode in the 1970s. He incorporated vibrant hues in a stark contrast to the monochromes of his earlier works. He continued to experiment with materials, incorporating copper and other metals into his works, creating a sense of depth and texture. Throughout his career, Stella remained an advocate for experimentation and pushing artistic boundaries. He wasn't afraid to break away from established trends and forge his own path. And this relentless pursuit of innovation led him to explore printmaking techniques in the 1980s, creating large-scale, vibrant prints that showcased his mastery of color and form. I remember back when I was in art school, a friend of mine lamented the fact that every time he felt like he had a new idea, he would do some research and find that someone else had done it first. I think that's a common feeling among artists. Finding a new perspective and a new space to innovate is most artists' white whale. Stella somehow caught that white whale repeatedly throughout his career. In fact, from the mid-1980s up to the 90s, Stella produced a series of works based on Herman Melville's most famous novel, Moby Dick. And that series interprets literature through a mix of painting, sculpture, and printmaking. These later works remix the elements with color, textures, patterns, and irregular forms that are a far cry from the black monochrome paintings that launched his career. And it can be hard to categorize Stella. While he's noted for his contributions to the minimalist movement, I would say at his core, Frank Stella wasn't really about minimalism or any movement in that long and storied career. Frank Stella was about experimentation and innovation. In the later years of his life, Stella embraced the world of sculpture. His monumental, brightly colored sculptures graced public spaces and museums worldwide, showcasing his ability to translate his artistic vision into three-dimensional forms. His constant experimentation with form, color, and materials continues to inspire generations of artists. He remained active until his passing on May 4th, 2024, leaving behind a legacy of groundbreaking works that continue to challenge and redefine our notions of contemporary art. Frank Stella's story is not just about the creation of art, but about the courage to defy convention and forge a new path. It's a testament to the unwavering pursuit of artistic vision and the transformative power of artistic expression. His life serves as an inspiration to all who dare to dream big and leave their mark on the world, one brushstroke, one shaped canvas, one monumental sculpture at a time.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.